Do 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 do. Hey, you know what happens when a government or entity talks about banning something? Everybody goes out and buys one or two or three, yeah, or whatever that is. I'm not talking about any particular object. Censorship. I don't know what your views are on censorship, and honestly, don't be offended. I don't care. I'm not a fan of censorship. Let me give you a perfect analogy. Perfect analogy, really. All these forums on the internet are moderated by little Gestapos, and they love to exercise their power. It gives them this feeling. And this desire for power and control over others is a primordial form of agnosis in all forms of Indian and Greek metaphysics. And what happens is when you suppress stuff, people go elsewhere. You know what happens when you hold this tomato? Nothing. You know what happens if I were to squeeze this tomato as tightly as I could? You know, in my tyrannical, evil desire for control, it just ends up squirting through my fingers. People and their will to know is exactly like water. It will always find the lowest spot and it will flow there, and it will, you put a rock in the middle of a flowing river, it will go around it, and it will also too at the same time erode the rock. People's will is exactly, when people hear about stuff being banned, whatever site that may be, and I could guess you would know which sites I'm talking about, of which there are countless ones. People, you will really perk interest up in that. When you ban stuff, you never really ban it. Remember Prohibition when they were going to ban alcohol? And then more people got drunk and became alcoholics during Prohibition than before? That was a really smooth idea. Yeah, the more people try to control stuff, the worse they make it. Here's a perfect example. In all these evil forums all over the internet, where these little Gestapos, they ban people from telling the truth. And I experienced this for decades, like with this other guy. I'm an expert in Pali, and I would debate these idiots. I would give them book and verse in the original Pali, the ancient Pali. And oh man, people do not want to be told the truth. Evil people don't want to know the truth. What they want you to do is they want you to pet their fur and agree with the nonsense that they believe. It's like, I don't care what you believe in. Here is a fact. This, what you said, is illogical and is also non-doctrinal. Doctrinal, excuse me. People don't want to hear that. Because people, and here's a secret that nobody seems to understand, people are not truth seekers. By and large, people are not truth seekers. But there was one interesting forum, and I was on a lot of energy forums. I don't really post there anymore because I don't have the time for that. It's called Energetic Forum. I don't know if they've changed things, but it used to be this way. Okay? There is no moderation. People self-moderate. Kind of like society self-moderates, People have fundamentally common sense at a rudimentary level. Is that you could say whatever you wanted, but people, they could ignore you if you're not on the topic. You can't be talking about apples and oranges on an energy forum. They want you to talk about energy. They wouldn't moderate people. People would get mad when you post facts, and they cuss you, and then you might cuss them back. And that's okay, because people vent. And when you keep people from venting, let me give you a perfect analogy of this, and this is what's going on. When people censor stuff, you know this as well as I do, because recently things have been censored on various places on the internet, and you know exactly what the hell I'm referring to. Everybody all of a sudden that didn't give a damn really wants to know about this content that was censored, and they will seek it out any way that they can. And it just makes it more popular, and it inspires hysteria and nonsensical, hysteria. I don't know the difference between two types of volcanoes. There's volcanoes in Hawaii where they're always belching up lava. There's really never any serious eruptions. It's like, hey, the lava's flowing, we need to move. It's okay. It's constantly spilling out. A diarrhea of lava. And then the dangerous ones, just like censorship, and this is what censorship does, is like volcanoes like Krakatoa, Mount St. Helens, Pinatubo. These are the ones that build up pressure, and there's a big cap on top. And then all of a sudden it just goes off like bam, and then everybody dies within countless thousands of miles. That's exactly what censorship does. It's not good. Anyway, in the energetic forum, People were not muzzled. They were not like little Gestapos running around trying to silence everybody. All these forums because the internet, unfortunately, as sick as the internet is, and there's a lot of sickness on the internet, there's a lot of these people that want to shut you up because they are ruled by the evil in their brains, in their spirit actually, to have control. They don't even control their own bodies. Nobody controls their own bodies, really. You know, we can exercise, we can have a little bit of control. But what they do is they try to extend their control to other people. Say, you need to worry about yourself. As they used to say, tend to your own damn knitting. You know, as long as you're not harming anybody or like screaming fire in a crowded theater, you have the fundamental metaphysical right, yes, I said metaphysical right, to say what you wanted to say and argue with people. You see, argumentation in its purest form is not arguing like cussing each other back and forth. You know, it's working out. And like the founding fathers of this country, they had a lot of arguments, but you know, they were respectful. It was about debating, well, that's not wrong because this fact, this fact. No, you're wrong because this fact, this fact, this. You know, true, pure form of argumentation has been completely lost in this world. People have become so stupidly polarized. And polarization always leads to like Krakatoa and Mount St. Helens, and it leads to censorship. And censorship leads to a bigger, kind of like, you know, the worst volcano in the world maybe is Yosemite National Park, right? It's very idyllic and calm. It's like that's when that volcano goes off, it's literally gonna block out the sun for probably several years or a decade or something like that. You know, very, very dangerous. It's all capped off. You know, it's not belching out lava like in Hawaii, where it's not really, you know, the Hawaiians don't really give a damn. It's like, yeah, this lava's been flowing since forever. Big deal. Who cares? Let me give a quote, and I can't remember who said this, but you can look it up if you want. He said that civilization is a very thin crust over a volcano. Let's repeat that again. Civilization is a very thin crust over a volcano. When you censor stuff, you just only increase the thrust towards what you censored. If you really want to make something popular, you just tell everybody it was deleted or censored. That will really drive the hysteria towards that. The same way in prohibition. You say you're going to ban something, then everybody wants it. When governments try to ban stuff, you create problems. I'm actually someone who fully supports the dark web, torrent sites for information, local networks. As long as they're safe, they can be incredibly unsafe. There's not any 2020 or 60 Minutes or hard-hitting news anymore. It just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. The news today is so bad on both sides. It's way worse on one side. It's literally way worse than the horrible BS propaganda I used to listen to from the BBC. When I lived in Russia, communist Russia, in the early 1990s, you know, I would listen to English stations. Really the only English stations I would get, the U.S. Broadcast of Voice of America, VOA, would come in very weakly. I think the Russians were blocking it, but the English stations would come in. I mean, so I spent a lot of time listening to the BBC. The news today is way worse than the hideous propaganda, and I know the BBC is even worse now. It's worse than the hideous propaganda I was listening to broadcast in from England while I was living in communist Russia. Literally today, the news is so bad, you know, and I love the Russian people, by the way, but this is serious. The news today in this country is so bad, where 60 Minutes and, you know, hard-hitting news 2020 used to exist. Not saying that they were the best in the world, but it's so bad today that literally the Russian propaganda wing, RT network, you know, I don't care whether you like RT or not, but it's a propaganda wing of Russia. And that's okay, you know, every country has their own propaganda wing. But the propaganda from RT is way better than any of the news here in the United States. And that is a really, really scary statement. You know, the land of the free and the home of the brave, yeah? It was never totally free, obviously so, but it's really bad now. without common sense and without hard-hitting news, people are sheep and they'll believe any lies or propaganda, especially the ones from their government. I say a lie repeated often enough becomes the truth. Unfortunately, that's the case. Lies and BS and propaganda do not infect those with wisdom and common sense. They're immune, but that stuff is really rare today, unfortunately. There's no more hard-hitting investigative news anymore. Now that the news media is so insanely corrupt, not saying it was like pure as Chase Snow before, but it is so bad now. You literally have persuasive demons feeding off of people's fear and hysteria with lies and propaganda. Right now we're not, all of this censorship combined with the fact that there's no real news anymore, we got like a Krakatoa forming. I hate to say this, I'm not a fearmonger, I'm definitely not like that at all. There is like a Krakatoa or a Mount St. Helens or Pinatubo. There is hardcore pressure building on a sealed bottle. I used to do a lot of scuba diving, and a buddy of mine in deep state Florida, he was outside the store when this tank blew up. When you cave dive, they put burst discs in. They're just very thin copper plates, and to keep, when you're deep in cave, I used to do a lot of cave diving, you put double burst discs so you didn't have a bleed out, because then you lose all your air and then you die because you're deep underwater and deep far back in a cave. So some guy double burst disced his tanks like everybody kind of does for cave diving, and then he accidentally cranked it all the way open, and that sucker just went off like a nuke. It blew away half the building. There's just, right now with insanely corrupt, unreliable propaganda, nonsense news media, combined with censorship, you basically have like a scuba tank that's been double burst disc, and there's this huge tank that fills scuba tanks, and you're supposed to crank it wide, open slightly, and you slowly fill your scuba tank. But you can very, very easy, and this is why a skilled person is never supposed to do. They just rip it, and it'll dump an enormous amount of pressure into that tank, and with that double burst disc, it's you got a nuke on your hands. Not literally a nuke, but I mean, a really, really dangerous situation. And that's what's currently going on with this censorship combined with endless propaganda. It is worth the hard-hitting news. Someone used to be a person, he's dead now, like Charles Krauthammer. I never agreed with everything he said, but he would analyze it logically. You never knew if the guy was on the left or the right. He just analyzed the facts, and he was handicapped. He broke his neck when he dove into this pool, and he'd been handicapped since he was in college, I believe, at college age. So all he had was his mind, and he was an acute thinker, and he's dead now, of course. He died last year or 2 years ago. I mean, he's one example. People like that don't exist anymore. Everybody on the left and the right praised the guy because he was very logical and hard-hitting in his analysis. He wasn't always right, and he himself admitted that he wasn't. But all you have now is excessive censorship and polarized morons spreading fear and propaganda and BS and poppycock. And the only thing that I can see right now is like Mount Pinatubo or Mount St. Helens forming very, very quickly. And I am not a fearmonger at all. I can see it, though. The world, no particular country am I pointing to here, the world can't continue down excessive censorship, because you censor something, you really perk their attention. You want to bring a lot of attention to something, just censor it. And that causes hysteria and fear-mongering. Don't censor stuff unless it's like pure evil and you're talking about doing horrible things to people. Yeah, we're not talking about that. Not talking about that kind of censorship. We're talking about censorship of facts. Like doctors reading off statistical facts. Like, well, here's a couple doctors and they're reading off and there's just one example of countless examples. That's not good. That doesn't bode well for humanity. I don't care what you think about what side you're on. I don't give a damn about your politics, and you don't give a damn about mine, and nobody should give a damn about it. We should care about common sense and wisdom. But people don't have that anymore. People have abandoned reason and self-reliance. Some people, really there are only three types of people in this world. Sheeps, wolves, and sheepdogs. There's only those three types of people. I can spot a sheep from a mile away. It takes like 5 seconds to identify what a sheep is. Bah! Are you a sheep, a wolf, or a sheepdog? I don't really want to know. It's none of my business. What you believe or care about is none of my business, nor do I care. But you should care about censorship, and you should care about accurate, hard-hitting information where someone brings you the facts and they don't bring you their personal BS and vomitous spew about what they believe, and they tilt it through the prism of their own pathetic belief system. It's like, here's the facts. Boom, 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 boom. This is a possible conclusion, but feel free to conclude your own conclusions. That doesn't really exist anymore, and that's sick and sad. The internet's partly to blame for that. When the internet came up, these news places, they went broke. Like all the newspapers went broke. Who the hell buys a newspaper anymore? So now the news, to make money, they had to start sensationalizing the piss out of everything. And for anybody out there that's in the news, if you don't know it, don't know what I'm about to say, then you're a frickin' fool. The news is supposed to report the news, not make the news. Did you hear that? If you know anybody that's in the news, or if you're in the news, just remember that your job is to report the facts, not to editorialize, unless that's specifically what you do, but everything today is just editorial. You're supposed to report the facts, report the news. You're not supposed to be the news, you know? Kind of like the photographer. You're supposed to be behind the camera recording what's going on. You're not supposed to be in front of the camera, you know, being part of the news. That's not the job of real media. Real media is not supposed to make the news. They're supposed to report it. And apparently the entire Western world has forgotten that fact.